everybody. My name is Kara Cooper. I coordinate Kentuckians for Energy Democracy. We're a statewide coalition working at the intersection of utility accountability, energy affordability, and the transition to a clean, safe, reliable, and resilient energy system. We've been partnering with folks at RMI on this energy regulatory expert series over the past several months, and I'm really excited to have folks here today to be talking about how we can leverage existing resources to add new capacity quickly. So if you want to go to the next slide for me there, Jeff. Great. So we've got two amazing speakers with us today, our experts in the room. We've got Carl Robigo, who operates an energy consultancy as Robigo Energy LLC, based in Denver, Colorado. Carl's got 35 plus years of experience in energy and is recognized as an innovator and expert in utility regulatory issues relating to clean and distributed energy services and technology. Carl serves on the boards of Colorado Electric Transmission Authority, the Center for Resource Solutions, and Inside Climate News. He's been a Texas Public Utility Commissioner, a Deputy Assistant Secretary to the U.S. Department of Energy, Vice President at Austin Energy, among other positions. Carl is a graduate of Texas A&M and has a law degree from the University of Texas, as well as a Master of Laws degree in environmental and military law. He served as an armored cavalry officer and judge advocate in the U.S. Army. Carl's worked in solar energy for his entire career, helped create the PV Compact and UPVG, led the Department of Energy Solar Research, co-authored Small is Profitable while at RMI, developed a first steps plan for Jacarla Apache Nation, implemented the first value of solar tariff. This is a long, extensive background on Carl. Just to say that Carl is obviously an expert, and we're very excited to have him here with us. And then we also have Jeff Quigley, who is our Senior Vice President at Customer Solutions at Virtual Peaker, where he leads commercial strategy and operations. With over 7 years at the company, Jeff has been instrumental in collaborating with electric utilities to develop and implement distributed energy initiatives. In his current role, he leverages his extensive industry knowledge and experience to engage strategically with utility executives nationwide. As a key player on the company's leadership team, Virtual Peaker has expanded from a Kentucky-based startup to a prominent force in the clean tech and distributed energy sector. Prior to Virtual Peaker, Jeff held various roles in consulting and strategy within the utility and energy industries. He holds a BS from American University and an MBA from George Washington University. And Jeff resides right here in Kentucky with us in Louisville with his family. So glad to have a Kentuckian expert in the room with us. And I think I'm going to hand it over. I'm handing over to you, Jeff, first, I think, to get us started.
I think we were going to go Carl
Carl,
first.
sorry. Carl first, and then Jeff. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for being here.
I'm flexible. Any luck?
There we go.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what I did wrong, but more importantly, I don't know what I did right. Let me get started. So, thank you guys for joining us today. I'll go fast. You already heard much more about my background than anybody needs to. I do want to make one note here on this cover slide about a new organization that we're stood up called Common Charge. I invite you to go look at it. It's a coalition of business and NGO organizations that are seeking to advance distributed energy resources of all kinds. So a very ecumenical kind of organization in the DER space that is actively seeking members and ultimately seeks to be a force for good in the DER world and in the energy world in general. So with that little plug for something we've been working on for a couple of years here, I'm going to move into the content of what I wanted to talk about. Let me see if I can do this right. There we go. Okay, so first a couple of things just to clarify terminology. Make sure that you know how I'm speaking, even if we might differ on some details. First, DERs or distributed assets. We're trying that term out increasingly as a way to get to something that sounds a little less wonky. for the general public. But DERs or distributed assets are technologies and services that are sited or operating at the distribution level of the grid. So there's not a size rule, there's a location and impact rule. And of course, it includes a whole host of acronyms: distributed generation, distributed storage, demand response, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, building electrification, and anything else we can think of. VPPs is a term that is really all over the place out there. But generally speaking, VPPs, virtual power plants, are any managed aggregations of DERs out there. So you've got DERs in multiple places. Somebody manages them, puts a management umbrella on them, and then treats that as a virtual power plant. Lots of other, like I say, conditions various people apply, but that's where you can go. Aggregation, which is that function under VPPs, is the physical and or contractual coordination, dispatch, and or co-management of similar or different DERs. So lots of solar generation or lots of batteries or solars and batteries, all done to achieve market and operational scale. And then critically important that we make sure we maintain an understanding of the difference between the transition and transformation. The transition, much of the work of the IRA was about moving the electric grid away from reliance on resources with negative climate impacts, the transition away from fossil fuel dependence. Transformation is something even bigger, more challenging, and that we've barely begun, which is the move of the electricity industry away from a cost plus model to something better. There's options out there. Baseline issues that guide all of our consideration today are: number one, there's rising demand, or at least a perception and risk of rising demand if new loads are not well managed. Second, rates are going up, even without all the new AI or data center demand that people are talking about, or other kinds of demand out there. Rates are going up, and just a snapshot of rate cases across this country shows that utilities are pushing to increase rates for everyone for a whole host of reasons. I think the poster child is Florida Power and Light's ongoing rate case, which started today, which started with a $10 billion rate increase proposed. So rates are going up. We could have a discussion if you want to about why they're going up, but it's a reality. The cost plus model itself is a fundamental issue. And we don't have to go into all the details about it, but it incentivizes and disincentivizes a whole range of behaviors. How those impact the things we care about, how that model impacts the things we care about, is fundamental to our understanding about how we can get the things we care about done. And then finally, we are not without distributional equity problems in terms of access, service options, and affordability, meaning the pain and the benefits are not distributed equitably. And many people would say that means that it's not fair, and fairness can be improved. All right, so visionary concept for what we can do with distributed energy resources and through distributed energy resource aggregation. If we do it right, we can bring net value to our systems. We can make our electric distribution systems better, stronger, more resilient, more affordable, bringing plus values to everyone and freeing up valuable pocketbook money for spending on other things that are also costing more in our lives. Adding resources that are provided not through the traditional utility path, that are either procured from third parties or compete directly with utilities, can help bring market discipline to monopoly utility businesses. Remember that cost plus model? The only way utilities increase profits is increase capital spending. Increasing capital spending raises rates, that increases profits. That's the virtuous circle of the monopoly utility business, but it's not a virtuous circle in terms of ensuring that rates and services are made more efficient by the forces of competition. So adding new resources from new providers into the mix is good sort of well, like I say, discipline for the monopoly utilities. We do it right. We can also bring equitable access to sustainable energy so that we can get away from this division between those who can do DER and those who can't afford it. We can make it affordable, available to all customers at all economic levels and of all kinds. DER and DER aggregation can also bring private capital and operating expenses to grid infrastructure, diversifying the sources of the funding that have to pay for all of our electric service. And then at the very local, community, even level basis, DER done right can bring local business growth and energy transition support to what we're trying to do in terms of policy, in terms of the way we live our lives. Sum it all up, as we said when we wrote Small is Profitable, right-sized and right-sided resources are the path for lowest cost and highest performance in getting what we want out of our electric utility and services industry. So what's the best way to do that? Well, I identify 6 best practices here that you can look at as at least starting points. And the articulation of these is all over the place, but this is sort of my assessment of what I've seen out there. First, economic efficiency is driven at least in part by transparency in pricing, as well as consumer decisions, consumption decisions are driven also by fair, stable value and prices that they can see for the production and the exports that we might bring to the system. So we've used methods like value of solar analysis and increasingly benefit cost analysis under the National Standard Practice Manual for benefit cost analysis to try to bring objective discipline to our evaluation of what DERs can bring to the grid. These same principles can apply when we're aggregating as well. In fact, I would argue that they're essential because it's the only way you can objectively and transparently take account of all the benefits and costs to come up with a true cost effectiveness assessment. Good principles of benefit cost analysis, as well as value of solar and other approaches, also are founded on broad stakeholder engagement, making sure that all parties have a voice at the table, as well as staying current with trends in markets and ensuring that regulators have a role in also reflecting the public interest in the outcomes of these various processes. Customers can't make decisions, good decisions, without objective, clear, and useful information. And as I already mentioned but even more broadly, market rules. The actors, whether the utilities or competitive or third-party providers, have to operate against a set of rules that we can all understand. And with that kind of focus on better information and better market rules, we can leverage community action from organizations for agencies, there's a typo here, for agents with agencies' expertise and networks for a common solution that works for everyone. That means utilities have to share data. Far too much information in the utility space is treated as confidential today, and it acts as a barrier to competitive opportunities. We need to base our laws, rules, and regulations on meaningful levels of market experience. We can't act as if every state has the same solar penetration as Hawaii and California, when many have less than even a few percent of distributed energy resources in place. Those are different market experiences and conditions, and they have to be accounted for as we design our approaches going forward. The hardware has to be able to connect to the grid in a process that's fair and efficient. That also goes with permitting. More of that back in a minute. And then finally, if we really want to get a toehold on this transformation agenda, which we should undertake, supplanting the 100-year-old cost-plus model with something better, we need to figure out ways to work with utilities through regulation and stakeholder engagement to create a climate of innovation, experimentation, and learning by doing, all while ensuring accountability. That's not how we traditionally do the utility business, but it's how we should. So what things can help us get down the road? Regulatory commissions and regulators are looking at lots of different options, and the key for local advocacy is to make sure that you tune your requests to the current little p political and regulatory atmosphere. There's been a great deal of action and discussion around performance-based regulation. I'm a big fan because I think we can add performance elements instead of just increasing capital spend as the criteria for successful utilities and for making utilities shareholders more profitable. We can set targets, just put objectives out there and expect utilities and other market participants to meet those targets. One of the things I really love as a concept, I think is way underused, is regulatory sandboxes. I think we created one of the very first, if not the first, when we created the Pecan Street project back in Austin many years ago, creating a place where the utility, competitive service providers, customers, and other stakeholders could all get together to try out ideas in ways that weren't just treated as, succeed or get punished badly. Places where we could try out ideas and see if they'd work for the broader system. There's been a good and healthy amount of focus also in conjunction with performance-based regulation on the implementation regulations for DER interconnection, planning, and ultimate management through things like DERMS. God, we have a lot of acronyms. Distributed Energy Resource Management System. Continued focus on these will be necessary. A lot of mischief is done in these technical requirements that are associated with getting DERs together and controlling DERs together and offering their resources into markets together. So regulators, and it is a relatively safe and smart play for regulators and advocates to always ensure there's an ongoing agenda. If you're not sure what to do, one of the things that regulators find is a good way to start are generic mechanisms where they look at multiple kinds of resources, multiple implementation options, multiple business models, and flesh those out through broad stakeholder engagement processes to really explore where first steps, next steps might be best taken. We never run out of appetite for pilots and demonstrations in the utility business. Perhaps we do too many. If 49 states have tried it once, you really don't need a 50th demo project or a 50th pilot. But, we all feel like our state's special, our location is special. So there'll be more of these. I think they're a good place to work in conjunction with the sandbox ideas, where you want to try out things you haven't tried before that might be high risk, but that can prove a point or prove the efficacy of a concept without having to fully implement it. There have been non-wire solutions dockets and sort of regulatory mechanisms implemented in a number of states. We have not exhausted the opportunity to take advantage of non-wire solutions approaches because we are constantly going to have, we're always going to have a section of the grid that needs help. So when we can specifically and acutely identify where a problem is, non-wire solutions are a good piece of the regulatory toolbox. Usage note here, when originally coined by the folks at Con Ed in New York, they used to say non-wires alternatives, but as often happens in the utility space, a bunch of old white guys didn't realize that NWA was an acronym somebody had already taken. In addition, we're not alternative. These are real solutions. So a lot of us have been pushing towards a more conventionalized treatment of the phrase non-wire solutions, non-pipe solutions for the gas industry, for moving forward on addressing these issues by leveraging the power of and the flexibility of DERs. And then finally, because of this attention and focus that has been sweeping across the country, especially in the Southeast and the Mid-Atlantic generally, Midwest as well, we have large loads asking to interconnect. There have been good and healthy discussions about expecting those loads to incorporate flexibility capacity. When we ask them to do that, we should be standing right next to them, funny as it may sound, in order to have a conversation about how distributed energy resources can complement large load flexibility requirements as well as large load interconnection. This is a special moment for us. And in my conversations with people in the tech space, many of them are frustrated by what they see as barriers and burdens coming from utilities and are considering self-generation. Well, that sounds like the same toolkit that can work for individual smaller customers as well. I believe there's room for common cause if we start talking about how do we find solutions to grid challenges regardless of scale and then tailor the solutions appropriately. What do we got as problems facing us? Well, we'll always have problems because we're humans and we're not perfect, and our systems are old and they were designed for the early 1900s instead of the early 2000s. I've already mentioned one. We don't all use the same terms when we're talking about things. So even if we can't agree on definitions, we at least need to be explicit about what we mean when we say things. The next thing is that there has been an awful lot of regulation writing by state legislatures lately. I could wax philosophical about why it is that legislators get active in terms of providing extreme detail, guiding regulators. As a former regulator, I'll tell you, I don't generally think that you should micromanage a regulatory commission from a legislative position. That the focus, the agendas are just substantially different, but it's a reality out there. That means that advocates need to be conscious of not only what's going on in the regulatory proceeding, but also what's going on in the legislative forums and nothing you didn't already know. Politics have always been a part of regulation, especially in places where you're appointed by an elected governor and confirmed by an elected legislature. But of late, politics have been creeping more and more into regulatory outcomes. Again, something I don't necessarily think is a good idea, but it is also reality. What we need to do is be clear in communicating that technical, economically efficient solutions are apolitical, and that we can move forward to solve these issues without worrying about the color of our political flag. Policies relating to competition and innovation are generally lacking. We seemed to have weakened our kind of core American belief that we're a free market democracy in which businesses are out there competing to satisfy customers, and that even in the places where monopoly structures are deemed to be still appropriate because they work better under some circumstances, we should always be looking for chances to introduce competitive and innovative forces into the technical and regulatory agenda. We backed away from that a little bit, but I think there's still more opportunity, and we need to work on reminding people that that's what this country was founded on, and that there are many more opportunities to have the utility we need, as well as the competition and innovation that we prize. Affordability and cost shifting are all over the radar in regulatory proceedings that I've been engaged with. the one interesting side effect of an increasing political focus at regulatory commissions is that they realize that the politics of affordability are very real. Um, would I go so far as to say affordability is the third rail of electric utility regulation? Yeah, you mess that up and you're going to not be able to advance any agenda that you have in mind. Cost shifting suffers from the problem that nobody exactly means the same thing about it. The term has been misapplied. And in reality, we founded this entire utility regulatory model on intentional cost shifting, spreading the costs of a big electric system across all countries, customers, as fairly as we can. What we need is not the hypothetical imaginary world in which all cost shifting is eliminated. There's a whole lot of subsidy receivers who wouldn't want that anyway, big and small. But what we need is a more transparent and conscious focus on when costs are shared between customers and over time. Um, because of the big push in data centers and large tech loads, we are experiencing something we experience every 10 to 15 years in the utility space, which is how are the burdens of reliability, resilience, and other solutions allocated among customers? Should small customers have no access to modern technology but be required to subsidize the rates for large users? Should large industrial customers be forced to subsidize new technologies for small customers? It flows many different directions, and these issues are simmering below an awful lot of discussions. They deserve transparent treatment in our policy, regulatory, and technology innovation initiative. Um, we have been lacking for many years in the bench depth among stakeholders to engage in regulatory and legislative processes, which, as I described, have become more multifaceted and more nuanced. And at the same time, we have not had the adequate staffing at regulatory commissions to make sure that those hardworking folks can do their job in supporting good decision making by commissions. It costs money to do this game right. And everybody who participates needs the ability to participate fully and to bring their best arguments and tools to the conversation. There are ancillary services out there that are not directly related, but that are impacting. Permitting siting rules get in the way of aggregation strategies and DER deployment in general. Much of this can be streamlined. We just need to stop for a minute and fix it. Yes, there's politics going on, but I do believe ultimately there's more common ground than there are differences when it comes to what we need to live happy and healthy lives. And a big part of solving that will be doing what we can to, like the forums like this, to advance education, awareness, communication, transparency, and engagement by all citizens in the energy that is so essential for their modern lives. With that, I've given you my quick and fast talking overview of the stuff that comes to my mind when I think about how can we accelerate DERs to leverage their benefits and to get the capacity and the functionality out of our utility system that we need in today. So thank you for your time. What I'm imagining we'll do is we'll go to the next presentation and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Yep, that sounds correct. And
I'm going to stop sharing if I do it right. Yay, I did it.
yeah, looks great. Go for it,
Thanks,
Jeff.
Jeff.
Participants can now see your application. You have started a screen share. You are screen sharing. Your screen sharing is paused.
All right. Hopefully everybody can see my screen all right. All right.
Looks good.
All right. Awesome. Thank you for that confirmation. All right. Well, thank you all very much for for inviting me to join today. I'm Jeff Quigley,
You are
based
screen sharing.
here in Louisville, Kentucky, which it's not very often that I get to speak to a Kentucky-based audience, so I'm very excited to be having this conversation with you all today. I don't want to spend a lot of time on us, but I do want to give maybe a little bit of context on the company and sort of what we're doing today. Based here in Louisville, Virtual Peaker, about 10 years old. We provide a software as a service platform to electric utilities to allow them to operationalize virtual power plants. So our technology specifically connects to mostly what we call behind the meter devices. So anything that's inside of the home or business that can be used to reduce load, or in some cases put load back onto the grid to save customers money. So we are deem ourselves an IoT company, an Internet of Things company primarily, and we use a lot of smart home technologies that we'll talk about here in a second to achieve our goals. How we ended up here in Louisville, our founder and CEO, Bill Burke, is a Louisville native, and after he finished his PhD, moved back to Louisville to work for GE Appliances and helped them design and build smart home technologies. And then from there, Virtual Peaker was born. So excited to be, again, having this Kentucky-based audience, and excited to kind of delve more deeply into some of the issues. So utilities have been controlling devices for a long time. So we kind of broke the history of what we were calling demand-side management, though that doesn't include energy efficiency, into three sort of major categories. So direct load control, which many that live in Louisville might already know about, where the LG&E, the local utility, actually provides switches that go onto things like air conditioners, and in other markets, water heaters that get turned off during extremely hot or cold events that help reduce costs. So mostly it's just emergency-based control. It's not based on economic conditions. In the early 2000s, smarter thermostats started to come to fruition and started being installed primarily started in California, but the PCT, the programmable communicating thermostat, many of you may have already had one. They were built by companies like Honeywell. Nest became sort of the big name in this business. And those companies realized that getting partnerships with utilities could help them build this relationship where they could get customers incentivized to buy more thermostats and potentially participate in these programs, and they would, in return, the utility would receive dispatchable loads. So this has sort of been their strategy for a long time, until I would say maybe the last 10 years or even less, where this concept of a virtual power plant has come to fruition. I think Carl accurately sort of discussed how the definition really varies based on who you're talking to and what the
You are screen sharing.
and what the different definitions might be. But a virtual power plant, I think, still includes this two-way thermostat market, but now we're starting to see it really focus on a more broad set of things like distributed generation, residential storage, and they're being operated for a lot of different use cases. So it's not just about reducing that peak demand on a really hot summer day. It might now be about responding to changes in market price, or it might be about different parts of the grid that are congested and need to be resolved. So virtual power plants, at least conceptually, have a lot more flexibility inside of the operation center than sort of the traditional DLC or DR approaches. This is obviously sort of how we would visualize virtual power plants working based on our technology. I'll start at the bottom and kind of work my way up. We integrate with all different types of devices that customers are often already buying. So smart thermostats, residential batteries, electric vehicles and their chargers, smart water heaters, things that have an off-on switch or different scalability functions. And we integrate them into our platform. And then we provide technology around customer engagement. So you have to notify customers that you're doing this inside of their home. You have to give them incentives. You have to make sure that the customer understands what it's in it for them. We also provide load forecasting, so helping utilities decide when are they actually going to need to use these assets to manage the grid. And then in the center, I think Carl used the term DERMS, so we would consider ourselves to be what's called an edge DERMS, a distributed energy resource management system. And the edge refers to, like I said earlier, sort of behind the meter. So anything at the grid edge are things that we're really heavily focused on. And those devices are brought into our system through the cloud primarily, but we also use other other connectivity solutions like OpenADR, which is an open standard that utilities have been supported for many years. On the wings of the diagram are just sort of ways in which we integrate with other systems inside of the utility. You need to know when a customer enrolls whether they're really your customer. You have to know if you're going to evaluate the performance of their program, how they are doing with you have to pull meter data in order to evaluate that. So those additional integrations are critical to long-term success. We operate virtual power plants across North America, so the US and Canada. And they cover a broad brush of different types of utilities. The reason I'm showing this slide is to primarily focus on sort of the variability and incentive structures that different utilities often have. So I categorize these trailblazers all the way on the left because many utilities are not directly incentivized to take a lot of risk. I know this is probably an obvious statement, but in certain states and in certain municipalities, you see utilities that are really encouraged to take on risk, to learn and to grow and to innovate. And so utilities like Green Mountain Power, Portland General, these utilities that we've worked with for many years, and they've really designed these pilots that have eventually evolved into what we refer to as programs, which are essentially long-standing direct customer engagement frameworks that have scaled pretty substantially. I'm going to go to the investor-owned side. On the investor-owned side, you see a slightly different story where many of them are, in some cases, regulated to do this. And so they don't necessarily have a direct economic incentive because most virtual power plants are not capital expenditure. They're, in fact, an operating expense. And as Carl mentioned, sort of the cost plus model, it's really about, in some cases, a regulator sort of pushing for more DSM programs that can then allow the utility to get some kind of recovery on that. So they have an economic incentive. And then rural electric co-ops, I think, are really interesting in this space because despite having a sort of a historical reputation of being very risk averse, they're also very incentivized to cut costs for their customers. And so we're seeing a really deep and broad engagement across the co-op space that has been very exciting for us. They definitely see the value in what we're doing and are doing it in a lot of cases faster than some of the investor owns because they're not as heavily regulated. So when we talk about key challenges, we really think about the success of, again, what we talk about as a program. So in order to have a virtual power plant, you have to have a program that is designed and operated typically by the utility, but sometimes by a third party that gives that designs a sort of a compact with the customer around why they should participate. And the big challenges that we see in the success of these programs first start with device availability and penetration. So as I sort of showed earlier, we're talking about things that are in many cases already in the home. So maybe a smart thermostat. The customer needs to have those or at least want those devices already. And so as a result, you have biases towards areas that have higher penetration of those devices. In some situations, those areas tend to be higher income. So you will often have situations where you're giving out incentives to customers to participate in these programs, but it's not always equitable relative to the broader population. So that plays a key role in program design and making sure that utilities and third parties understand their customer very acutely. And when I say external market factors play a role, what I mean is sometimes these devices grow at different rates. So an example would be electric vehicles. So being able to control and manage electric vehicles is a huge opportunity. A lot of the manufacturers of electric cars are engaged and excited about this space, but they still have to be consumers still have to be excited about these things, and they still have to buy them and install them in their homes and and drive them in this particular case. And so things like residential batteries, other things that are more expensive require sort of that supportive market in order to be successful. Utility incentives, I'm going to sort of use this term on sort of two ends of the spectrum. So the first thing, when I say incentives, what I mean is they have to provide incentives for customers to participate. In the case of a smart thermostat virtual power plant program, a lot of times you're actually asking your customer to be uncomfortable for some length of time while they adjust your thermostat or change conditions in your home. So a lot of times you have to give them an economic incentive to participate. And if that economic incentive isn't there, or in some cases isn't large enough, customers may not sign up and your program might not be successful. On the flip side of that, the utility themselves have to be incentivized. And I think I referenced this a couple of slides ago that different utilities have different incentive structures based on their market conditions, based on how they're regulated. And if a utility doesn't have either an economic or regulatory incentive to participate in these types of programs, they're not going to do it. The last thing I'll say is that customer experience is really, really critical. And I think when I referenced this idea of risk earlier, for a lot of utilities, our view is the biggest challenge is that you're engaging customers behind the meter in their life space, in their home, which means that if you're going to manage a device that they own or operate, you don't have a lot of chances to make a good first impression. And so making sure that customers understand what you're doing, making sure that they have a good framework for communicating with you if they don't understand. All it takes is one bad, Yelp review or Facebook, message for your program to struggle. So really making sure that customer experience is top of mind is essential. Because most virtual power plants are treated as an operating expense, scale is really the foundational challenge that utilities have to achieve in order to make these programs cost effective. They have to be successful relatively quickly. So as an OpEx, you don't get sort of the 5 to 10 years of capital leeway that you might get with building a new piece of infrastructure. And so programs break even at different inflection points. You might see a smart thermostat program that grows very quickly, breaking even in the next first year or two. Battery or electric vehicle programs might take longer. And so when we work with utilities, we're always sort of talking to them about what is the marginal benefit of modifying load using a virtual power plant, and where do we think we're going to see that break-even point so that everybody benefits. And this is a little bit of a difficult slide to read, but maybe if I can explain it and hopefully make more sense. There are lots of different types of devices and things that can be in a virtual power plant. So at the bottom, you'll see I have batteries, electric vehicles, thermostats, water heaters, and each of them have different qualities that make them valuable inside of a virtual power plant system. So starting with smart thermostats are not particularly complex in terms of their design, and they don't have a lot of different use cases besides being able to change their the customer set point, but there's a lot of them out there. And so because of that size of the population, they become very attractive for utilities to run sort of early stage programs or pilots. Whereas smart batteries, residential batteries like Enphase, like Tesla Powerwall, Solar Edge, these are incredibly valuable because they provide maximum flexibility, more load. In some cases, they can dispatch back onto the grid in places that allow that, but not everybody has them and they're very expensive. And so you have these different DERs, distributed energy resources, that have different qualities that can really make or break success long term. And so just to summarize, really as a company, when we're working with utilities, we're really focusing on the value of that capacity. How do we drive scale? Whoever's operating the virtual power plant, which is usually in our case a utility, they have to be focused on driving that scale and then figuring out all the different value streams that scale can support. The technology mix, like I mentioned, when I say that, I mean the different types of DERs in the program, they have to be balanced. So you have to ensure that you have the right kind of assets, but also ones that can actually meet the operational use cases that are serving your grid challenges or the utilities grid challenges. And then this is maybe an obvious statement, but utilities and stakeholders have to have strong partnerships. We work with nearly 40 utilities nationwide. We have more than 30 device partners. And so we sort of see ourselves as at this nexus between consumer technology companies and utilities that allow these virtual power plants to sort of come to fruition. And beyond technology, you have to have support both from local regulators in cases where the utility is seeking recovery, but also other stakeholders like solar installers or contractors or advocacy groups. So that's why conversations like these are so incredibly important. And again, why I appreciate being able to join you all today. I think that's my last slide. So if it works for everybody, I'll stop sharing and then maybe we'll see if there are any questions.
Thanks so much, everybody. And I think we're going to stop recording. Did we stop recording yet?